Good morning. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Marilyn Orr, President of the club, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV, as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel and Facebook. Our club meets weekly using this digital platform, Zoom. When we meet in person, it's at Laurel Lake Retirement Community for breakfast. We hope to get back to that soon. We meet most Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. So come out to join us for a meeting. We would love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact we are having on our local community and the world, please visit our website, rotaryhudson.org. So enjoy this meeting today and help us share the message that Rotary opens doors of opportunity.
Are we good to go, James?
Yes, I think we are.
Okay, good.
Started.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Liz Ramsey.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? Well, let's bow virtually. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your deep love for us, and thank you for sending your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ, to suffer on the cross so our sins could be forgiven and we could live in heaven forever. Please bless everyone in our Rotary group and give extra loving blessings to those who've lost loved ones. May we strive to pass your loving, compassionate kindness to others whom we come in contact with daily. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Liz. And now to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test, Bob Krantz.
Morning. I think James Field has not, he's here again. Okay, we are ready. May I lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test: is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, Bob. And now our president, Marilyn Orr.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. A very special welcome this morning to Patricia Getz. Patricia's application for membership was approved last week at the board meeting, and so it's really great to see her here again today. Her name has been posted to our website for the required 2-week period, and we will soon hope to welcome her as a full member of our Rotary Club. Also this morning, welcome to Mike Donovan. He is a guest of James Field this morning, and it's awfully nice to see you on board. This week's Gala Committee is scheduled for its monthly meeting this Friday, May 21st at noon. If you'd like to get involved with our major fundraiser, please consider joining us. You get to know the other members of the Rotary Committee pretty well, and it's fun planning and executing this fundraiser. The Rotary Rookie Pollinator Project was scheduled to plant this today this morning with the help of some of the Hudson Learning students affiliated with the Service Learning Club. Unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a setback, but you know what? We're nothing if we're not flexible. So look for your emails to hear some more information about when that next planting date is. But the weather is going to be beautiful, and it's time to get the plants and the seeds into the ground. Rich Warfield has got some information about the Scout Camp swimming pool cleanup that we traditionally do. The date has been set as Saturday, June 5th. The Scouts provide a free lunch and you get to share some good times as we do a good service for our community. This is going to be a general community service day at the camp. So there'll be others in, working on other parts of the camp as well. So come on out, have a good time with your fellow Rotarians, and let's get the camp ready for the summer for the Scouts. Let's show our Rotary pride. Again, this morning, Jim Lang has got an excellent program for us. Jim, do you want to unmute and tell us a little bit more about what we're going to hear about today?
Sure, I'd love to, and welcome Rotarians. This morning, our last installment of our Summer Fun Theme Month involves the director of the Cleveland Metroparks, Christopher Kohler. He's the executive director of the Cleveland Metropark Zoo. He has served as curator of animals at the Cleveland Metropark Zoo prior to being promoted to director in January of 2013. His current role, he's leading the zoo in a new phase with an emphasis on conservation, education, and animal welfare. Under his leadership, the zoo has completed the Circle of Wildlife Carousel, Nature Discovery, Ridge a Nature Play Area, Stillwater Place Event Center, Ben Goglic Giraffe Encounter, Rosebud Tiger Passage, a Zoo Hay Barn, the Jack, Joseph and Morton Mandel Welcome Pavilion, and Asian Highlands. Quite a lot of accomplishments. The Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Welcome Pavilion opened early in 2018 in June, featuring videos and informational signage about the zoo's future for wildlife conservation programs, creating a more engaging guest experience focused on conservation. Also opening in 2018 was Asian Highlands, a new state-of-the-art exhibit that is home to the zoo's Amur leopard, snow leopard, red pandas, and taken. The zoo opened the Daniel Maltz Rhino Reserve in early June 2020, which includes an additional outdoor rhino yard, which more than double the size of the zoo's current habitat for its eastern black rhino herd. Prior to coming back to Northeastern Ohio, Chris was the behavior research manager at Disney's Animal Kingdom, where he conducted research on animal behavior as well as conservation program evaluation and business metrics. Chris holds a BS in biology from the University of Akron, an MS in zoology from Oklahoma State University, and a PhD in experimental psychology from Georgia's Institute of Technology. He is currently serving as past chair for the board of directors for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the professional accreditation body for zoos in North America, after serving a term of chair for the board of directors, which ended in September 2020. A native of Northeast Ohio, Chris grew up in Lorain and currently lives in Strongsville with his wife, Gail, and his 2 children. So without further ado, please welcome Chris to our speaker's podium. It's all yours, Chris. Just unmute yourself and have at it.
Good morning, everybody. I'm actually kind of jealous because I see you guys all in your with beautiful backgrounds. I'm in the office because we are much more back to normal these days. I heard you all talking about the vaccine, and it's a lot of great changes for us. So I'm really excited. I appreciate you all reaching out. If I can, I'm going to try to share my screen and show you guys some images. It's always better to talk about the zoo when you have images to share. So let me pull this up real quick. And I am gonna. All right, everybody can see that?
Yep, we're ready to go.
All right, so just a little bit of background, because I feel it's helpful when we're talking about what the zoo's doing now to to remind people what zoos were, because I think a lot of people sometimes still have that version of what zoos were when we talk about what zoos are or how our zoos are impacting the community. You know, historically, zoos were really just an opportunity for folks to access wildlife. And when you think about what zoos looked like, it was a lot of hard architecture, a lot of bars, a lot of tile, mostly because these allowed easy cleaning of these spaces, and it was allowed easier to maintain control of the animals. Our zoo actually started in 1883. We're the 10th oldest zoo in the US. And it wasn't at our current location. This was actually, the zoo began on the east side of Cleveland in the Wade Oval area. So if you're familiar at all with the Cleveland Botanical Garden, in the outdoor spaces of the Cleveland Botanical Garden, the Japanese grottos were actually the old bear exhibits when the zoo was there in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And our zoo actually began to house the very rare and elusive white-tailed deer. Believe it or not, white-tailed deer were the first zoo animal that we ever housed, partly because deer were hunted to near extinction in Ohio and Western Pennsylvania, which is hard to even comprehend today, but that's the case. And if you look at the building in the back left corner of this exhibit or this image, we have that building today. It was actually relocated from Wade Oval to the current zoo. We call it Wade Hall. Currently, it's an ice cream parlor, but it was the original deer barn at the original zoo back in the late 1800s. So we relocated that here in the mid 1970s. I love this image because it's a stark contrast to what we're doing today. This is, I call this picture the lawyer's dream. Two young girls unsupervised in front of tiger cubs where they could probably reach their hand right directly into that exhibit, right? That contrasts how we're doing our tiger cubs today and the world that we're living in. But that's what zoos were. And how did zoos get those animals? Largely on hunting expeditions. These are images from Cleveland Zoo sponsored animal acquisition trips in 1950 and 1955. This was actually funded by the Stouffer brothers in support of the zoo. They were board members back in the day. That's Vernon Stouffer on the far right of that image there. So this is how we collected animals for the zoo, and this is what zoos were. By today's standard, it's, you know, most people aren't comfortable with this as a mechanism, but this is what we were for a really long time. That changed in 1969, and I feel this is an obligatory slide in every presentation I give in Cleveland because it is sort of our history, right? The Cuyahoga River fire, and it's not the Cuyahoga River fire, by the way, it's the 12th fire that was on the Cuyahoga River. The only reason why the public knows about this and Cleveland earned a reputation is because it was in a story in Time magazine in August of 1969. And the only reason people ever read that article, because it was a small article on the back of the issue, is because everybody bought that Time magazine issue to hear the gossip about the Kennedy trial and the car accident that Senator Kennedy was in. And this was before social media and things like that. So Time magazine was how people got that information. But in that issue, there was an article titled America's Sewage and the Price of Optimism. And it outlined how bad the conditions of America's rivers were. And these pictures that we've all seen associated with Cuyahoga River fires weren't actually from that fire. They were from significantly worse fires that occurred earlier in the century. But this narrative caught on, and in the years to follow, really everything environmental change. You see all of the landmark legislation that we have today, from the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act to the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And those last two are really key legislation because they really restrict and in most cases prevent zoos from being able to bring animals in from the wild. So really, I talk about this because I think in some ways Cleveland was the spark of the environmental movement in the 70s, but really it changed what zoos do, how they operate, how they think about themselves. So when you talk about what we are, we've changed to a really different focus on animals. We focus on the reproduction of our species. We focus on the health and welfare of our species because they're not disposable like they were in the early part of the century. We can't go out and get new ones. If we want to have animals for our collection, it's really on us to breed those animals. It's on us to work with other zoos to provide the best care and welfare for those animals. And what that means is we've evolved a pretty elaborate research department. We have graduate students from Case Western Reserve University. We work with Ohio Northern University and Kent State University. on a variety of endocrinology and research projects, behavior research. We produce graduate students that work at zoos all over the US. And our team is really invested in that. And just a couple of quick stories. This is Janet Leigh. She's a golden-bellied mangabey, a monkey species that came to us with diabetes. The team actually trained this animal to get finger and toe pricks every day. She gets her blood glucose read every morning and every evening. She's trained to take an insulin injection. And this is all in her ward, given that she's diabetic. Most people think, well, what do monkeys eat? They eat bananas. Well, bananas are high in sugar. So Janet Leigh's trained for green beans or potentially, a sugar-free candy every now and then as a reward. So the team's really invested in trying to maintain the health of the animals in our collection. This is an image of an ultrasound that we were doing on our female tiger. Hopefully you've seen in the media, we have some tiger cubs right now running around the zoo exhibit. They're absolutely adorable. As we prepared to, have those cubs, one of the things that we were doing is monitoring the health and welfare of our female tiger, Zoya. So this is pretty impressive that you're able to get an ultrasound on an awake tiger. And the team really works hard to be able to do these kinds of things. This is another success we've had in the past. This is actually an artificial insemination of an onager. An onager is basically a wild ass. And so it's hard to move males around in the country. They don't travel well. So we move the reproductive materials, and we're able to do an artificial insemination here with our vet and our science team. So when we talk about the zoo, we're really talking about a really modern scientific organization. This is Makolo. He is our male silverback gorilla. This is sort of the poster child to every doctor's appointment that any of us have, because what we did was we moved our gorillas off of the typical feed, and the typical feed for most zoo animals was a biscuited diet. So think about like dog food or cat food, but formulated for primates or other species. The challenge with those foods, even for our pet animals, is that they're really high in sugar. They use sugar to sort of make the food stick together, so it's a pellet. And what we're seeing is a high incidence of heart disease in our gorillas. And our team actually put our gorillas on a leafy green diet. So if you've been to the doctor in the past 10 years, they've told you to eat more leafy greens, eat more plant material. This is the poster child for that. This research that we did here was actually featured in National Geographic, putting gorillas back on a more naturalistic diet. And part of that is being able to get healthcare measures of it. This is an image of us training our male gorilla, Makolo, to put his arm out there. We can actually get a blood draw from him voluntarily. He's not restricted. He can pull his arm out of that sleeve at any time he wants, but we're able to get blood draws from him so we can monitor his healthcare. So there's a pretty elaborate system that goes on behind the scenes to really take care of these animals and provide really good care for them. But that's probably not what you think about when you think about coming to the zoo. You probably think about the animal experiences or education programs, and we have pretty extensive education programs. Most of those are coming back online now as we sort of pull back on some of those COVID restrictions. Our summer camps will happen this year. Our Professor Wild Animal Show will be coming back this year. A lot of the education programs going from young kids even to career days, where we talk about a variety of different jobs that can be had in the zoo profession, and really focusing on the education of young people to try and engage them. But we have conservation programs all over the world. We have conservation partners in Africa and Southeast Asia and Central America, really working on protecting the wildlife. So that's one of the key things that we do, and part of our mission is to really focus on that. We also focus on reintroducing wildlife in certain circumstances. This is actually a reintroduction of Puerto Rican crested toad tadpoles. We work with Puerto Rico to reintroduce toads. We breed the toads here, and over a 5-year period, we estimate that we've introduced about 1 million tadpoles back into Puerto Rico in vernal pools to be able to repopulate this toad species. So there's a lot of really interesting projects that go on behind the scenes, but really what people think about when they think about the zoo is coming out and having fun with the family. And we've done a number of things. Jim read the sort of my bio, which is a little bit embarrassingly long, but some of the things that we've done over the past few years is really try to emphasize the guest experience so people can have a great time. So the Circle of Wildlife Carousel, this was opened in 2014. This was the first capital project that we completed while I was director. So this is an obvious, you know, it's a really cool experience. Not only is it a carousel, but you can ride on a lot of different animals, instead of just the typical carousel horse, you know, everything from gorillas and snakes to bears and big cats. So it's a really cool experience there. We have it actually designed by habitat type. So marine animals are in the same area and savanna animals are in the same area. Kids really love that. Right next door, we added the Nature Discovery Ridge play area. So this is basically a manufactured play space, which is really intended to mimic the nature play that we grew up with, that kids today don't get a lot. You know, parents don't often turn their kids out to go play in an open field or in the creek in the backyard, like many of us did. So what we're doing here is trying to provide an opportunity for kids to do that, but with an infrastructure that supports 1.2 million guests, which is how many we see on an annual basis. So an opportunity for kids to get out there, play with water, build forts, you know, get dirty. This has been really popular, and really the only complaint we've had since we opened this is parents complain that they can't get kids out of the play area and out to see the rest of the zoo. So it's a really nice addition for us. Something that a lot of people don't think about is Stillwater Place. Stillwater Place is an event center that we built in the middle of the zoo. It borders on Waterfall Lake there. And this is a great place to host weddings, parties. We do holiday parties there associated with a lot of our events. This is a great venue for rentals right in the middle of the zoo. It's got beautiful views in there. And with the changes in the COVID restrictions, we're going to be doing a little bit more with that event rental facility this year as well. To mention Ben Goglic Giraffe Encounter, and that's what this is. It's an unusual round shaped deck, but what it does is it allows folks to go on and you can purchase leaves and feed them directly to our giraffe. And it's a really cool experience. The way it's designed, the giraffe's head just barely gets over the top there. So younger kids can actually feed through the netting if they choose, or you can feed over the top and you get an opportunity to see that 18-inch long purple tongue that comes out and grabs the leaf from you. And so it's a really cool experience. It's one of the few experiences where you can really get close to our wildlife. We try to really make sure that everybody's safe. So this is one of those great experiences to make that sort of one-of-a-kind connections with our giraffe. And from an animal exhibit perspective, African Elephant Crossing, which opened 10 years ago this year, it opened in 2011. This is probably the exhibit that really changed how we present ourselves and how we think about our animal exhibits. And really the big thing about African Elephant Crossing is that it's a series of exhibits. So it's not just one exhibit where the animals are in every day. There's several interconnected exhibits, and we actually move elephants around this space and through the crossing. It has a number of features. It has the water feature, it has the shade, but probably what's most important about this is that we hang the food to try to really encourage elephants to exercise those neck muscles, get their head up in the air to be able to feed. We encourage activity. We move them from yard to yard so they're continually walking. That exercise, again, you probably heard this from your doctor. I know I have, but that exercise is important. Eating the right foods are important. So what we're doing is we're creating a modified version of a natural habitat. We're not putting them out into a yard and they just stand there all day. We're moving them around, they get better exercise. And they're really, the best part about this is not only is this good for the animal, it's better for the guests, right? So instead of seeing animals sleeping in corners all day or just standing there doing nothing, you're seeing animals move, you're seeing animals do things, which is much more engaging from the public's perspective. Asian Highlands was opened in 2016. And this is a very cool experience. It's a heavily themed space, but what's really probably most impressive about this is the opportunity for our cats to get up. So this is a snow leopard, has the opportunity to get up above people. If you have house cats, you know that cats love to look down on the world. They like to get up high, whether it's on your, on the stairs or on a cat house or on your drapes, whatever it is. The same thing applies to these larger exotic cats. Where they like to get up and enjoy the breezes, but they like the view from there. So again, we're designing exhibits now where animals can sort of get up and move around. And what we're trying to do is, instead of having a small animal space that's surrounded by people, we're trying to take the animals and have the animals surround the people. We're trying to flip the script on that a little bit, and it makes a much more dynamic experience. This is Rosebud Tiger Passage. This was actually opened in 2015. This is the same kind of concept where the cats can get big up, and until you've seen a 250-pound tiger up above your head, you don't really understand how big these cats can be. These are our tiger cubs. So hopefully you've seen Anya and Luca and Indra. These are the 3 tiger cubs that we have in our exhibit now. So when we built this exhibit, this is exactly what we had planned. We imported a couple adult animals from zoos in Europe to be able to breed and benefit the captive population here in terms of adding genetics. But these guys are great. So if you hadn't had the opportunity, I encourage you to come out earlier in the morning because the crowds are smaller, but also the cubs are active because just like, kids, they're really active in the morning and they play, and then they fall asleep. The odds are better to see them active and doing the really fun stuff if you get here earlier in the morning. They are a big showstopper at this point. And then last year during the pandemic, we opened Daniel Maltz Rhino Reserve. So I hope never in my career do we ever do a ribbon cutting while the zoo is permanently closed. But Daniel Maltz Rhino Reserve is an expansion of our existing rhino habitat. We've had really good success breeding rhinos, but we only ever had one exhibit. And I tell people all the time, we have 2 female rhinos, we have 1 male rhino. Those female rhinos like our male for about 3 days a year. Beyond that, they don't want anything to do with him. So he's never really in the same space with them. So by adding this exhibit, we get a little bit more rhino space for guests to be able to see them. It's better for the animals involved. So again, this has heating elements for those shoulder months in the fall and in the spring where it's a little bit chilly out there. It's got shade, it's got water features. So animals are able to move between those habitats, and it's been very successful. And folks really love rhinos. They're big and very cool animals. And I mentioned we've had success there. 2 calves last year. We sent one of those calves out to the Buffalo Zoo. Another one's going to a zoo in California later this year, and then we're going to breed again. So hopefully we'll have 2 more calves. The thing with rhinos is the gestation period is like 15 months. So we won't see those calves on the ground until probably sometime in 2022. So then the last thing I just wanted to mention is, as we're talking about what the zoo is and how the zoo has evolved, we've really embraced evening events at the zoo, including Asian Lantern Festival. So this year, we'll be bringing back Asian Lantern Festival for the 4th year. Every year we get a different set of lanterns in here. They really create a really dynamic experience. Some of them are interactive. We had this great shark exhibit where people could actually walk through this giant great white shark as a lantern. There's animal lanterns, there's cultural lanterns. It really brings out a completely different demographic. It skews much more older and much more diverse. We do have some kids that come out, but it's a great evening event. We'll start this up in July and it'll run through the beginning of September. This is a great event. We do a trick-or-treat event around the Halloween season. And then for the past 2 years, we'll be bringing it back again this year. We've been doing Wild Winter Lights. And Wild Winter Lights is our holiday themed event. We do it more and more complicated every year. One of the things that we learned in COVID last year was we reopened with a drive-through. We actually turned our zoo into a drive-through experience, and it was really successful. We had a lot of people respond positively to the idea of being able to drive their own car through the zoo. Now you can't see everything, but you can see a good chunk of the zoo. And we got such positive response when we did that for COVID. We actually employed that for both our Asian Lantern event and for our Wild Winter Lights event. And we'll likely do that again this year, where if you want to walk around, it's a much better experience to walk around. But if you have mobility issues or you just don't want to get out in the cold, you can have that drive-through option as well. So we're really trying to find different ways to engage the public, to really connect them with our mission and really provide an opportunity for folks in Northeast Ohio to really get connected with wildlife. We are one of 240 AZA accredited facilities in North America. We put a lot of guests through our gates. Combined, zoos in the accredited zoos in North America reach 175 million guests. That's more than professional baseball, football, basketball, and hockey combined. So there's a lot of people that come through our gates. This is a picture from Cleveland Foundation Day. This was Cleveland Foundation's 100th anniversary, I believe it was in 2014. We had, in one day, we had 55,000 guests come through our gates. This picture is particularly disturbing in the age of COVID, where this amount of people in one space is a little bit disturbing. We don't see crowds like that on a normal basis, but we are a really popular destination and we're really proud of the way that we connect to the community. So we really try to communicate those stories they're really great public interest. And I mentioned the tiger cubs. We're going to be announcing some more babies next week that are really going to encourage people to come out. So with that, I'm going to pause and take a breath and see if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask me.
Well, I have a question for you, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the footprint of the zoo? How many acres? And do you have room for any expansion? It sounds like you've done a lot. Are you taking things out of one configuration and then turning them into others? What's the plan on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are 183 acres. But if you've been to our zoo, you recognize we're actually in a river valley. So, we actually operate on 3 different levels in the river valley. So while we're 183 acres, there's some areas that are just sort of ridge that really aren't usable. Our plan has been to not expand, and we could expand because we're adjacent to Brookside Reservation, which is another Cleveland Metroparks property. If we wanted to, we could expand into the Brookside Reservation. What we've been trying to do is replace habitats that are outdated. I mentioned Daniel Maltz Rhino Reserve. That replaced the old Monkey Island habitat. I mean, show of hands, how many of you saw the Monkey Island habitat at some point in your life? Yeah, extremely popular. Monkey Island was a WPA project. It was built in the 1930s, right? So we have some really old infrastructure, and our plan has been to replace that old infrastructure and then also fill in the gaps. So 183 acres is pretty large. And if you think our typical guest is families with young kids, we're trying to fill in those spaces because in several places in there's a long walk between animal exhibits, and we're trying to fill in the infrastructure before we expand out. So hopefully one day we'll be able to expand into Brookside with a larger zoo footprint. It'll probably be my successor. Hopefully I'm retired by then and we've filled in a lot of the infrastructure in between.
We have a question coming in from Mimi Becker in the chat section. How do you interact with the Convention on Trade in Endangered Species parties to both monitor and address challenges to protect those listed?
That's a great question. I'm impressed. Most people don't know what CITES is. CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, is a governing body. We work with CITES. We attend the CITES convention on an annual or on a biannual basis. So we participate in that. We basically encourage legislation that's going to protect wildlife. There's a number of species that we work with where we're working with CITES, as well as many of the larger international conservation agencies to really try to protect those species in the wild. Again, the only species that we actually take from the wild tend to be marine fishes, because we can't really breed marine fishes well in our environment. And the reason for that is basically most marine fishes breed by the sperm and the egg going into the water column. And so it's an external fertilization. That's great in an ocean. It's not great in an environment where you're filtering out all the particulate matter, which is what we're doing in aquariums. So breeding marine fishes doesn't work real well. But when you look at the number of marine fishes that all of the zoos bring in, it's significantly smaller than the amount of marine fishes that are being consumed for food, right? So we try to reduce that. We're working on some technologies to do that. But beyond that, from a mammal perspective, we're trying to be self-sustaining. And what that probably means is that long-term, you're probably not going to see some of the species that you used to see, because the reason we had them is because they were coming in from the wild, or the populations were being supplemented at least from the wild. So over a period of time, you're probably going to see fewer species in zoos, but I feel that that's okay as long as we're doing fewer species better, right? As long as we're breeding them well, we're taking better care of them, we're exhibiting them better, it's probably worth the trade-off long-term.
I have a question. Do you have many, being mindful of the elephant family dynamic, do you
Yep.
have many animals that you have to be, species that you have to be mindful of? You were talking about sending the rhinos off and stuff, that you have to be mindful of separating those families?
Yeah, absolutely. All of them, I would argue, all of them. So there's some species that are pretty solitary, right? So in the case of the tigers, for instance, dad doesn't hang around, right? Dad's not part of that group. He comes in with the females to breed, and that's about it. Same thing with rhinos, right? So you're talking about mom and offspring dynamic, and we'll keep those offspring together with mom until the point in their natural history where they would normally leave, right? And typically, with males tend to leave earlier, and that's an inbreeding prevention, right? they leave so that they don't end up breeding with mom, right? We replicate that. It gets more complicated when you get to family groups and primates, which is what my background is. Primates are a little bit more complicated than that because you'll see families live together and they stay together longer and they're actually learning parenting skills from the rest of the family. They aunt and uncle their siblings along the way, right? We replicate those family groups as often as possible. And one of the things you mentioned, elephants, that's probably the species that we're a little bit slower on the response to. Historically, elephants were managed a little bit differently because they are so big and so challenging. But what you're seeing now is that the groups are getting larger, and they're getting larger in order to be able to accommodate that natural history, which means that the exhibits have to be larger to be able to accommodate the larger groups because of the natural history. So you're seeing with species like elephants and gorillas, the exhibits are getting bigger and more expensive to build, but they're doing that because it's the right thing to do for the natural history. So it's something that we deal with on a daily basis, quite honestly, and we let natural history be our guide. What does it look like in the wild? And then how can we mimic that here in our zoo?
Could I come back to, it's related to this question, but the issue of those species that are not going to be accessible in the wild, that's because they're going extinct in the wild.
Yep.
And we don't say that, but that's most of the large African species as well as others.
Yes, we try to say that. Maybe we don't say it loud enough, but we try to say that. So our conservation programs really focus on protecting those wildlife species. And we can't have I wish we could, but we can't have a really well-funded conservation program for all the species in our collection, right? We have over 500 species, so we can't do that. We right now focus on probably about 15 species, 6 core programs that we operate off of: Andean bear, gorilla, giraffe, Asian turtle, lions and cheetah in Africa, and then a illegal wildlife trade program, which is really focusing on the species that are most heavily traded in, which tend to be things like rhinos, elephants, some of the animals in the pet trade. So we really try to focus on that and communicate that message. And our mission statement is actually to use the experience, use the excitement and the connection with animals to encourage people to change their behaviors and how they consume, how they protect, try to encourage advocacy, behavior change, and contribution to conservation. That's really what we're really trying to do when all is said and done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we have a clarification? Did you say that you have more than 500 species at this zoo?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
So remember, that counts fishes, right? So in our aquarium alone, we probably have 75 to 100 fish species. That includes frogs and spiders and things like that. So there's a lot of smaller species that you probably don't notice that you're walking by. So our primate, cat, and aquatics building and our rainforest building, those are the 2 buildings that hold the most number of species because they have a lot of those smaller bodied guys.
Now we've got a lot of finance people here. Can you give us an idea of what your budget looks like and how many employees you have and where you recruit? Where you recruit employees? I'm interested in that.
Well, so there's a couple layers there. So my operating budget is about $22 million. Well, in this year it's $20 million. It used to be $22 million. So we'll see, once we sort of recover from COVID, if we can get back to that neighborhood. Just like most organizations, about 70% of that is staff. Even with the expense of animal feed and things like that, it's just we're a labor heavy profession. In terms of animal care staff and the guest services staff. What we try to do, and so we're part of Cleveland Metroparks. My directive from the larger Metropark CEO is that the zoo is at least 50% self-sustaining. So of that $22 million, about half of it comes from our operating levy, the Metroparks operating levy. And then the remainder comes from earned revenue. And in my 10-year or my 8 years as director, we've reduced that operating subsidy from used to be about 60%, so now it's down to about 48%. And I'm ignoring last year because last year was certainly an anomaly. In terms of recruitment, I think it's a really interesting question. So we pay our animal keepers really well here. So we are a destination zoo for animal keepers. When we get people that come in as animal keepers, they don't leave. So my biggest issue in recruiting animal care staff is not pay, it's whether or not someone wants to choose to live in San Diego to be an animal keeper or Cleveland to be an animal keeper, right? So like many professions, it's just a choice of where you want to live. So we get a lot of boomerangs. We get a lot of kids who go away to college, get their first job somewhere else, and then come back because their family's here or because they grew up in this general area. What we're really trying to look at now is how we recruit a more diverse workforce, both from a guest services standpoint, those folks that if you come to the zoo, you're interacting with them, you're not interacting with animal keepers, you're interacting with that guest services team, you're interacting with the education team. And then, our facilities operations team is really the crew that keeps us afloat on a day-to-day basis. So right now, I think a lot of industries are dealing with it's the recruiting market out there is really tough right now. So not so much for us for animal keepers. That's a pretty stable workforce, and people tend to just move around. But from a food service, from a guest service, from a facilities standpoint, we're struggling like a lot of organizations are right now, and we're probably going to have to change some things in our structure, our benefits, and our pay to be able to remain competitive. So that in many ways, we're no different than any other industry in Northeast Ohio. We have all those same challenges. It's the animal piece that's a little bit different.
How many employees do you actually anticipate having?
So right now we have about 160 full-time employees. I have about 20 part-time employees. And then we bring in in a normal year, probably about 130 seasonal employees. We're not going to get that this year because nobody wants to work this year. But we try to bring in about 130 seasonals. And then on top of that, we probably have 300 to 400 volunteers that help support us in a number of different ways. So we're a fairly large operation.
How does one become a volunteer?
I can provide that information for you. We have a Metroparks volunteer department. We have a number of trail volunteers and volunteers that work at the nature centers throughout the Metroparks. But here at the zoo, we have folks that are interacting with the guests. We have folks that, if they stay here and are passionate about that, do a little bit of animal handling and get to talk to guests about the animals. So there's some really cool opportunities to interact with that. And we have a volunteer services department where I can share that contact with you, Marilyn.
That'd be super. We'd like that.
Yeah,
Hey,
we'll do.
Hey, Chris, how is the transition going to go with your guests with now June 2nd and I guess the lessening of the COVID restrictions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to go.
I think open the gates. Is that it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're open right now, and our current policies are masks are required in indoor spaces. Masks are not required outdoors unless you cannot maintain social distance, right? And all of that, the challenging part about this for us and many other organizations is if someone claims a health condition, I can't enforce them to have a mask on, right? And people learned early on, if they don't want to wear a mask, they just claim a health issue. So what we have right now is folks are not wearing masks outside as per our policy. Just like if you go to Rocky River Reservation and walk around, you're not required to wear a mask there. What we're going to see on June 2nd is if people say they're vaccinated, they don't have to wear a mask indoors either. And there's really no way for us to enforce that because of HIPAA, I can't ask to see proof of vaccination. So on June 2nd, no one's going to wear a mask. And I think that's just what we're going to see. We could require masks on our grounds, but we've been saying all along, we're an outdoor space. We're a safe space where the vast majority of our property is outdoors. So, at this point, based on the governor's recommendation and the CDC's recommendation, we're going to say that if you say you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, and that's going to be an honor system thing, but we don't have a lot of other options. So, in case you hadn't heard, on June 2nd, the pandemic ends.
That's right.
So how do you protect the animals, particularly the primates?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. So we had been using a 6-foot safety barrier for all of our dangerous species already, a minimum of 6 feet between the guest barrier and the exterior barrier to an exhibit. So that had already been our practice. And I guess we're just lucky that fit the COVID model of 6 feet that we've been hearing about for over a year now. So those barriers will remain there, right? So you can't get closer than 6 feet to any of our animals as a guest. And in some cases where you could, we installed plexiglass barriers. We installed, bike barricade barriers to keep people back so you couldn't get within 6 feet. From a staffing perspective, despite what the governor and the CDC say, we will still require masks for all of our staff, vaccinated or not, if you're working closely with a COVID sensitive species. So that will be big cats, that'll be primates, that'll be the mustelids, things like otters, which we know are COVID sensitive. We'll still require that of our staff. So if you're working closely with those species, you'll still have to wear a mask. And we've been doing this for decades, right? We've been wearing masks with primates. Our keeper staff have been wearing masks when they're feeding primates or training primates. You probably saw it in the image of the gorilla getting the blood draw. She was wearing a mask. That picture is about 8 years old, right? It's what we do. So it's, while the world has gotten a crash course in PPE and wearing masks, we've been doing it for decades.
Did you have any animals that were affected by COVID in this zoo?
I'm knocking on wood. We have not. There have been zoos that have had tigers, snow leopard, a gorilla group that have been COVID positive. Every animal in the zoo has recovered from COVID. So there have been no deaths related to COVID in the animal population. But we do know that there was a mink farm that lost thousands of animals in I think England or Europe to COVID. So we know that animals can be impacted. We haven't seen that though. And I'm knocking on wood, so hopefully it stays that way.
Chris, I have questions. One of them isn't really a question. I noticed that I didn't have a cold last year for the first time in my life because I was wearing a mask. I'm thinking, am I going to wear a mask next fall as it comes on? And I'm thinking, yes, maybe. Number two, key species. I keep hearing that. My wife and I were out at the Mobus Natural Center in Aurora a couple of days ago, and I noticed there's a pond out there with beavers in it.
Mhm.
And the sign said these are key creatures in this environment. Once they collapse, other animals disappear. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with you. I'm going to wear a mask on a plane for the rest of my life. COVID or no COVID. So yeah, there are a number of key species that have an impact on other species in a region. So in the case of beavers are one of those unique species that create habitat, right? So beavers do stuff that maybe humans don't like from a property protection standpoint, but they dam up areas, they create wetlands. Those wetlands create feeding opportunities for birds and for other species, fishes. So once you take beavers out of that ecosystem, then you lose that wetland creation. So you lose the feeding opportunities for birds. And then you see is that the rest of those species, the numbers go down or potentially even disappear. Another example is white-tailed deer right now. The reason why there's so many white-tailed deer is because we remove the predators, we remove the wolves and those species that prey on them, and then we don't hunt like we used to. So the deer population is out of control. And if you go into, we see this all the time in our Metroparks forests, there's no new succession. There's no young trees. So it looks great because there's a lot of big old trees, but when those trees are going to die eventually, they're going to get old and die. And there is no succession because the deer are eating everything. Everything like 6 feet and down it's clear cut. That's not a healthy forest. So, and that exists because we remove the predator of deer. So there's a lot of examples like that here in the United States, here locally in Ohio, but globally, where when you take a species out of an ecosystem, it may seem inconsequential until you realize what that species was doing for a variety of other species. And we're going to deal with that. And with climate change, whether it be increased temperatures or flooding, you're going to see pressures on a lot of these species in trying to adapt. So what we're trying to do is make more people aware of it. I love to do these talks where you guys are bringing forward this information because you've obviously heard it. We want to make sure that more people are aware of it because these are decisions that people are making every day that they don't necessarily recognize what the impact is, both on our lives and on our economy. They think it's just an environmental thing, but our lives and our economy, and we just got done, I just said it like it's over. We've been dealing with a pandemic that is directly related to wildlife-human interaction. This won't be the last pandemic. As long as humans and animals are interacting with each other in an unhealthy way, there's going to be something like this that happens again. Hopefully not as bad, but we've had it happen multiple times in the past decade. This was the one that sort of got outside the box. So I think that's really what we're trying to do, is educate people on why these things are important. It's not just an environmental thing for people in conservation. It has a direct impact on all of our daily life, whether you see it or not.
So here at Laurel Lake, we have the same species being hauled off of our pond out here, the beaver. And they haul them out because it's going to lift the level of the lake, and it will upset the folks walking around the lake.
It's like stupid.
It's complicated. It's always complicated.
Well, it's the wolf in Yellowstone, for example, but a number of states have just passed laws to unrestrict their hunting take, and they killed off 20% of the wolves in one state in 2 weeks. So how do we combat that? Because that's a keystone species for those kinds of ecosystems.
Yeah, so the long and the short of it is that our politicians make decisions based on, quite honestly, who yells the loudest and who contributes to campaigns, right? and that's how decisions get made in our political system. And until enough people say, yeah, there could be an impact to livestock on ranches. Yes, that could be the case. Yes, those wolves could take someone's dog. Yes, that could be the case. But there are these other impacts that happen if you remove the wolves. And until more people talk about that, until more people understand that, we can't have a real good conversation about it. It's just we are a society that reacts to the immediate crisis and not necessarily make a plan for the long term. And they're not easy, right? I'm not a rancher that's losing livestock in Wyoming, right? So I probably shouldn't have an opinion on it. But until we have a good conversation about what not only the short-term impacts are, but the long-term impacts, we're going to continue to make short-sighted decisions. And that's really what the biggest issue is.
So what is planned for the future as far as development of new areas, and what do you have on your planning desk? What are you working on now?
So we have two big capital projects that we are in the process of beginning the fundraising process. One is our bear habitats, our tropical bear habitats. Those are currently our oldest exhibits in the zoo. They were built in the 60s. They're traditional old bear grottos. They make me sad. So we're gonna make a plan. That'll probably be our next capital project, where we redo those tropical bear habitats. The big the prize, hopefully in my career, will be to redo our rainforest building and to add gorillas and orangutan outdoor space for those animals to create significantly larger spaces. We have a world-class gorilla program here, from the science, from the conservation. The chair of the Gorilla Species Survival Plan, Dr. Kristen Lucas, is our director of conservation and science. We do amazing things for gorillas. We have a terrible gorilla exhibit. So, taking that next step to sort of be the gorilla capital of the world is on our radar. That's going to be a big expense. That's going to be something that we're really having to focus on. But it's exciting. And that's going to be a lot of what I do over the next 10 years is really work on fundraising and working with the politicians and trying to find ways to be able to fund this bear exhibit and this gorilla exhibit and a number of smaller exhibits along the way. But those are the two big ones that are going to take up the majority of my time.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
Chris, I have a funny memory of your elephant exhibit one time, and I'd like to mention it to it. When my grandson, which is Tom's son, Rob, was about 3 or 4 years old, Joan and I took him to the zoo, and I had a set of binoculars and I put it around his head, and we went to the elephant exhibit, and he was looking out into the elephant exhibit, and he was using the binoculars to look at it. Well, there's a little girl that walked up to him about the same age, and she was looking in there. And I said to Rob, my grandson, Rob, why don't you give your binoculars to the little girl next door to you? She might like to see it also. So he gave the binoculars to the little girl. She's looking through the gate and she's looking out the exhibit. And her father said to him, Annie, take a look at the elephants out there. You may see some of your mother's relatives out there. And then he said to himself, I don't think I should have said that.
You, there's a lot of stories I could tell, things that you hear walking around a zoo. Most of them are not appropriate for the Zoom call, so we'll just leave it at that.
Now, you've got three really cute baby tigers. What will happen to those tigers as they grow? Will they stay here? Will they be sent to another zoo? What's their future?
So all three of them will end up in breeding situations at other zoos as they reach adulthood. So they're going to stay together. At probably anywhere from a year to 18 months old, the male will be the first one to move because we don't need him breeding with his sisters. So he will be the first one to move, or well, the most important one to move, I should say. And then the other two females will go to breeding situations at other zoos in AZA accredited facilities. They won't stay here. They can't go back with mom or with dad. That's just not the tiger's natural history. They're solitary species, right? So they'll go off and start their own families, right? It's like kind of going off to college. So that's the natural history. And they're really cute now. Come and see them because these cats get big fast. So by the end of the summer, they're gonna look like adults. They're gonna be pushing that envelope in terms of looking like adults. So when you say that cats leave at a year, 18 months, it seems, oh, wow, that's really fast. They're going to be full-sized animals, right? They're going to be ready to be adults. So, that's the plan. And then once that happens, then we'll look at rebreeding our cats again. But we won't do that until we have, the space to be able to accommodate everybody and that we've got everybody in a good situation for their future. So that's what we do, right? We breed the species and then we look to help other zoos that are doing this to be able to create these exhibits that hopefully are inspiring people to think more about animals in the environment.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been absolutely fascinating. I've learned a lot. My goodness. And I'm planning to come back really soon and bring
Thank you all very much
with me.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully you get to see you come out at the zoo sometime soon. Be well, everyone.
Well, we've got an exciting couple of meetings coming up. On June 2nd, we will have our scholarship winners and their teachers and their families will be joining us. So that's one of my favorite meetings of the year. Next week, we're going to be having a club assembly where we're going to look internally a little bit at our club and we're going to be talking more about the gala as well as some of the plans that we have for the new year under President Pat. So make sure that you join us to keep up to date as to what's happening within the club. I'd like to recap just a little bit. In March, we featured Andy McDowell with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. We've heard from Andy this past week, and he's told us that they were informed us that the Clean Ohio Conservation Fund has awarded them their full ask of $360,000 to assist in the purchase of the 55-acre O'Brien Preserve. They currently have another large ask out in a grant request with the Burton D. Morgan Foundation and expect to hear about that in June. And already have several generous Hudson residents who've come forward with financial support. So it's looking very, very positive for this project. And they've begun having some talks about improvements that they'd like to make to it. They're looking at improving the access, the road coming in, and then also doing some development on the southwest corner, putting in possibly restroom stations and formal hiking trails. So the future is looking very, very good there. Lastly, again, as a reminder, the Gala Committee is meeting this Friday at noon. So let's look back in history on this date. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte was declared the Emperor of France by the French Senate. In 1896, the Kadinka Tragedy happened in Russia. A mass panic on the Kadinka field in Moscow during the festivities honoring the coronation of the Russian Tsar Nicholas II resulted in the deaths of 1,389 people. The coronation was specifically set in honor of his birthday and became a tragic reminder for those people. That was the beginning of a rule that didn't turn out so well. And then lastly, in 1927, Grauman's Chinese Theater opened in Hollywood, California, and it's known for its celebrity handprints and the footprints on the cement in the theater's forecourt. It currently houses the biggest IMAX auditorium in the world. And on that, let's call this a day. And thank you very much for attending our meeting. This was absolutely fantastic. Really great to hear about our zoo. That's one of the jewels of the emerald necklace, right? Absolutely. So thank you again for joining us.